Now, if you look at the different elements of human fertility, one of the important element is the extent of poor nutrition, which is directly related with the propensity of amenorrhea or the temporary absence or suppression of menstruation among women. So, as age at marriage, or also age at menarche is delayed due to the poor nutritional status among women. And then if you think about natural fertility, which is actual fertility that exists in the absence of the deliberate fertility control. So if you look at the fertility, actual fertility of any society, these are some of the important factors which matter. The age at onset of menarche, then of course it is very much influenced by the nutritional and the physical situation of the women. And there are, if you look at various other evidences, for example, the extent of the climate, the physiography, the extent of stress in the family, all these factors have also some linkages with the age at onset of menarche, which is an important predictor of the natural fertility status among women. So if you look at the other side, the social components. So what is happening? Social component does play a very significant role in influencing the fertility levels in any society. In case of agrarian society, we observe that because of higher mortality burden and the lower standard of living, large family was largely considered as an advantageous situation. So if you recall this theory by John Caldwell, he talks about the intergenerational transmission of wealth from the side of children to the parents. So in the traditional societies, the children are considered as asset because lot of roles and responsibility in the traditional agrarian society is actually seen from the children's side towards the parents. So when the parents become older, the children are expected to play a role of insurance and also look after the parents, particularly in cases where the social welfare schemes, social health insurance, etc. are very weak. So there is an incentive in traditional society to have large family size, wherein the kids, when they grow, they become bigger and the parents become older, so the children can look after the parents. If you contrast this with these most developed society or post-industrial countries in the global north, generally they have lower burden of mortality and very high standard of living. So where smaller families are actually preferred. And here also, if you take the Caldwell theory of intergenerational transmission of wealth, what happens is a reverse. The wealth transfers from the parents to the children, and parents have the higher opportunity cost. And so therefore what happens is, now parents need not look for kids to look after them when they grow older, because parents themselves have enough wealth, enough resources, and they have stronger social welfare system or networks. So what happens when these people are getting older, they have enough savings and they also have health and family insurance, etc., which basically lessens the demand for children in the Western society. So the smaller families are desired in the case of these modern and Western societies context. So why human fertility exists in human history? If you look at the human history, for the last part of human history, the fertility levels remain significantly high. And the fertility was very high because in order to compensate for the higher burden of mortality. And the net increase in the world population was very, very insignificant. So because children was considered as a source of security and labor in the traditional society, also because of the lack of the old age security system in most of these developing countries, fertility levels were higher. On the other hand, one of the other important factor is the status, the gender disparities in the traditional society. For some reason, in most of this traditional society, the norm of son preference has kept fertility levels quite high. So if the demand for son is high and for some reason son is not being born, so people will continue to have kids until they fulfill their desire to have at least one son. So the fascination with son preference is marked in most of these traditional societies. Second is, of course, the lack of inheritance rights for women in many of these traditional society. So what is happening is, because of the lack of inheritance rights, people are looking for having sons so that the property stays in the family. Then the limited opportunities of education, occupation, and the political representation. So in some way, the prevailing gender inequality, norms, roles, expectations, all this put together, putting women into a disadvantageous situation. And this situation is also pushing the levels of fertility on the higher side in some of these traditional societies. So there is a very important demographer called Ansley J. Cole. He did a very important European fertility project in 1973. He came up with certain recommendations about what are the sort of conditions which are suitable for any nation or society to undergo fertility decline. First is, of course, acceptance of choice as a valid element of marital fertility. So the people should have a wish to improve the situation of their life. So family planning or family building must be looked as an important choice if they want to experience social mobility or improvement in their standard of living. Second, the perception of advantage from a reduced fertility. People must also understand that with reduction in fertility, it is going to have advantageous impact for the family and individuals of the family. And third, knowledge and mastery of the effective techniques of fertility control. The cost of fertility regulation. So as long as people have all these three conditions met, which is they should be ready, they should be willing and able to regulate fertility. If all these conditions are met, then of course people will go for fewer number of children. And if these conditions are not met, then people probably would not feel comfortable to go for lower or smaller family size. Now if you look at some of the implications of fertility transition on the reproductive health. So most of the previous research and studies have shown that society where we have relatively large families, which means that burden of early marriage and teenage pregnancy is high. In those circumstances, what happens that then women would get smaller or fewer chances to go into schools and colleges and university. So the chances of human capital formation for women reduces. Rather, they spend large proportion of their time into family building, family rearing and caregiving roles, which is many times very important but economically not very productive. And because of which their decision making role in various important matters within family and outside is also get reduced. And because of early marriages, large window of reproductive career means that they are going to enter into large number of children at smaller intervals. There will be smaller spacing between births. So the net effect on the health and well-being of both mother and children will be very daunting. On the other hand, if you contrast this situation with societies, nations and regions where the fertility levels are lower or preferred family size is smaller, it has multiple advantages for all children, mothers, family and society as a whole. What happens at the children level is fewer children means the family can invest more resources in the smaller number of children, like if there are one or two kids. On the other hand, if you have more than one or two kids, it means that the same resources need to be apportioned among all the number of children. Hence, the per capita availability of the resources declines. And also, given in traditional societies these gender norms and differences, roles and expectation between sons and daughters, often the daughter feels neglected, whether it is about investment in nutrition, healthcare, education. So because of limited resources in large family size, people choose to invest whatever limited resources they may have to give more preference to sons than the daughters. So what happens is when women or the young daughters are not well fed, they are not properly taken care when they fall sick because of various kinds of illness. So what has happened is that even if they are sent to education or schools, maybe their educational performance may not be as well as compared to the other kid who may be a son. So because of these differences in the treatment within families, it is reflected on education. And then what happens that after some years, the girls, either herself quit not to continue with education, or parents, considering that the performance of the girl is not very well in the school, may take her, or just take her out from the education. So the net effect is that the poor girl will not be able to get opportunity to continue education. And then what happens in such cases, mostly these young girls are, they are married off, goes to her, the family, and then they have their children. And in this way, this vicious circle of early marriages, with limited education, limited control on their own body, their own affairs, their own family building processes, and therefore they have limited opportunity to make decisions about their own future of their family members. So in this way, if you contrast, societies where childbearing and child rearing is at higher level, large family size generally are not, egalitarian from the gender perspective, and then women do not get enough opportunity to participate in the decision making process and economically productive activities. And so therefore there is a need from the part of the government and policy makers and program managers to work on all these vital dimensions, starting from education, because education is one of the key areas that can really help to bring not only knowledge, understanding, but behavioral change in the society at large. Education can help young women and both young women and men to understand the value which is attached with seeking education and training. It can enable them to understand that family building is a process that can be planned, which has a tremendous benefit for everyone in the family, and in the large, if you go in the large extent, on the long run, it has a greater benefit for the society as a whole. So therefore there is a very direct connection between fertility transition, reproductive health, and the prospect of development of any society. If you look at most of the Western countries today, they have fewer children, they have smaller family size, and they have very strong economic systems. So people invest large amount of time in economically productive activities as compared to only investing majority of their time in the reproductive activities. So this is something which is a matter of choice that people have to make decisions, and this decision can only be made in a way when they are knowledgeable, when they understand the implications, and they have a capacity and means to exercise their informed choices. Government of India and many governments across the world are signatory to the International Conference of Population Development 1994, the Agenda of Reproductive Health, which basically means that the role of the state, the role of the government today is basically to build capacity, knowledge, understanding, and provide access to diverse means through which couples and individuals can decide about the number of children, the spacing of children which they would like to have in their lifetime. So that is what the Government of India has also adopted through its National Population Policy of the year 2000, which clearly states that the larger goal of the population in this country is make sure that our population sizes are consistent with our socio-economic development goals, and therefore fertility levels are important. Society can only progress when there is a transition towards a situation where families are planned by design, not by fate. It allows family to invest resources in areas where they want and they plan to invest, rather than a situation where they have to invest resources in areas which happened by fate. So if there are large number of children on regular interval without appropriate spacing, what is happening is that the condition of children and mother is not in a good shape. So there is a huge stress on the family resources in the area of healthcare expenditure. In Indian context and in most of the developing countries context, almost 60 to 70% or even more of the healthcare spending comes from the family budget, means out of pocket expenditure. Hardly 15 to 20% of the cost is paid by some of the state or the government side. And what is happening, almost 30 to 40% families, they overnight turns into below poverty line status due to these health implications in the families. And so therefore, the planning of family and family building by design is the need of the hour. Some of the research which has been done recently in some part of India, for example, this is one of the study which says that it's very important to understand the role of not only couple but other family members in the family when the decision about the number of children or going to seeking health facility or family planning method comes. So family members are important players, whether they are husband, whether they are mother-in-laws, whether they are sister-in-laws, they also have a very critical role to play. So recently one of the studies have found in Indian context that the young women, they generally prefer to talk to other young women in the family or in the village or in the neighborhood who has similar status in the life, and they can share the anxieties, the issues, the challenges of family planning, family design, or the spacing between birth, and they can learn from each other. So in this way, these are some of the possible social networks or social capital on which young married women can rely. But studies found that many families where young married women staying with their mother-in-laws, and if there is a misalignment in the preferred number of children or the sex composition of the family, then it has been found that women, young married women, if they're staying with such mother-in-laws, what is happening is that these young women are not getting opportunities. Rather, they are being greatly discouraged to interact with similar women who are of similar need in their life. And so therefore, because of this discouragement, she is not able to go and seek health care or access to family planning. She is not getting access to information to implement her own desire. She just need the desire to be approved by someone who she think is important from her perspective. So, this is really a very complex thing that, fertility is simply not a straight decision between, husband and wife. Rather, it is a many times decision of the important family members. And so therefore, from the development policy perspective, it is very important for the policy and program managers to understand that fertility transition, the role of other important family members is also critical. So there is a need for behavioral transformation, information communication with extended family members also, because many times with in the traditional societies context where women have limited education, whether they have limited decision making agency, so the role of other important family members become very key. And so therefore it is important when these young women go to health facility, for example in the primary health center or in the community health center, then there should be some opportunities where mother-in-laws and daughter-in-laws should also be counseled about the birth spacing. One of the important limitations of India's family planning program has been, it has been too much focused on one method, which is female sterilization. Unfortunately, out of the entire umbrella of the family planning in the country, almost 80% focused on female sterilization. To a certain extent, it has defeated the purpose of the family planning itself. Now, what is happening in many states, for example, in the southern states of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, young women of the age 21, 22 or 23, after completing their family size, they are going for sterilization, which is very, very rare in some other part of the world, because the idea is for them complete their family and go for sterilization. Now, that is not family planning. Family planning is to have, healthy reproductive life and proper spacing between birth. When people do not understand these ideas, they have their children in a quick spacing without proper healthy spacing. going for sterilization. So on the one hand, if you see, it looks good, people are getting sterilized, but the major problem is that they don't understand the importance of the healthy spacing between birth. So that is a concerning trend, in this large and diverse country, both in terms of its culture, its customs, traditions, geographic variations. With all these diversities, it is important for the government and at the union and also at the state level to invest its limited resources in the area of counseling, so that healthy spacing and its benefit can be understood. Otherwise, the focus on sterilization per se will not be able to deliver the major, the point of spacing between the births. And the last point I would like to mention is that, there is a need to work on female education. It's very critical. It will allow to reduce the burden of early marriages, teenage pregnancy, reduce the problem of poor reproductive health status of women, and allow both young mothers and their children to remain healthy and grow as a productive asset for nation and society. Thank you.